wanna see good news. You don't see on regular TV. From another perspective, something relative to your needs. And we gonna have deep subjects, and we gonna turn the lens. And there's no topic we won't skip. So please don't miss weekly. Tune in to weekly check-in. Weekly check-in. Weekly check-in. Weekly check-in. Tune in to weekly. Tune in check-in. Weekly check-in.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Y'all, it's been a month of Sundays. I missed you all.
I missed y'all too.
Good to be back.
Good to be back.
Look, in the world of Black people, you know we got 11 million jobs and things to take care of. So I am glad Dr. Sherise, Janaye Nelson, I know you are in Louisiana. How did you fare with the weather?
So we actually didn't have water or power for 2 days. You know, we weren't talked about as much on the news, and I understand, you know, our population is not as large and not as many of us were hit. But here in the city of Baton Rouge, where I am, 40% of us lost power. Or lost water, or both. So about 40% of the city did not have both of those. And it was, to be honest with you, I don't want to say a wake-up call, but it was a shift for me because it brought me back to the days of Katrina when I was in Alabama, in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, when Katrina happened. And it kind of brought me back to those days because I'm from a blue state, right? I'm from California that has a social net or a social safety net that is far more integrated in the lives of the people than they do here. And so the idea that, you know, neighbors take care of neighbors, that's really true, right? Like there's, you know, it's only when things get to an extreme that they open up, you know, sheltering centers and all those kind of things. Whereas in California, that would have been open, you know, in the first couple of hours once they realized that Entergy wasn't going to get the power back on. And so what it really showed me was that it produced this have and the have-nots, because those who could get a hotel room, right? So there was a limited amount of hotels because some of the hotels didn't have power. But for those of you that could get a hotel like myself, were okay. But other families that couldn't afford that, or, you know, or first come, first serve, couldn't get to the hotel, then they were just stuck in their cold homes. So it was really eye-opening for me to really understand the disparities and how things are very, very different state to state.
And that's good to know. A lot of the focus was on Texas, but from what I understand, it was Oklahoma, Louisiana, and Arkansas that felt a brunt of what was going on. And a lot of Black farmers, we'll talk about that later, but a lot of people were impacted. So I'm glad you are whole and with us today.
Yes.
I appreciate that. And Brother Dame, I know you are in sunny California, so all you got to worry about is earthquakes and riots.
Yeah, basically.
So how are you feeling? What has life been since the last time we checked in?
I'm feeling good. Life has been okay. You know, work is starting to pick back up. They're actually trying to open things up. So since people foresee things opening up, people are trying to get entertained again. So we starting to get those phone calls again. So, you know, that's been cool. And just continuing to spend time with the kids and the family and enjoy this time before everything goes back to semi-normal, I guess you say, the new normal or whatever. But things are good. I can't complain.
Okay, yeah, I forgot to mention, Dr. Nelson is a professor at Southern University, and Mr. Crawford is one of the band leaders of the Wild Bunch, which I always say when people ask, well, who's the Wild Bunch? I was like, that is the West Coast roots. That's like the best way.
Basically, yeah.
I can tell you, when you come, it is the turn up, the musicianship is excellent, the understanding and knowledge and history of music is dope. I really appreciate that. So let's get into, and I'm Kaya Niabi Shivers, and I rarely talk about me because it's not about me, it is about the brilliant minds of the people I talk to, and I'm so honored to be here. So let's get into it. So let's talk about Black farmers. Everybody loves a Black farmer this week. So let us talk about this provision in the COVID-19 stimulus bill that was just passed last week, I believe. So first of all, let me get kind of like your general thoughts on that and what that's looking like for you.
So for me, the bill is huge, right? For me, this is legislation that we saw after FDR. This is huge redistribution, redistributive policy. That's what this is. So we can get into the nitty gritty of the pieces, but we are redistributing wealth. And I think it's important to highlight that because of the Trump tax cuts, right? We know that the Trump tax cuts happened during those years, and how that in many ways broadened the gap that we saw during this pandemic, right? That's the reality of Black folks every day of our lives, right? But we got to see it, or the rest of the country really started to see the disparity and the separation. And so this piece of policy is redistributive policy. We are redoing, or we are rethinking the role of the federal government in the lives of its people with this $1.9 trillion bill. What immediately comes to mind for me is how the Republicans are going to reframe this in the midterm election by cherry picking portions of the bill and highlighting portions that they contributed to, right? So we know that this was a partisan vote, right? That it did not get one Republican vote in the Senate, and it did get not one Republican vote in the House, right? This is a partisan bill. So I want to be very clear about that on your show. And I want to be clear that my prediction to your audience last year about Georgia being able to flip blue, not just for the presidency, but also for the Senate, is what produced this victory. So for me, there's political implications, and then there's a new social order that is now being erected because of this bill.
I want to go more into that, but first let's break down a little bit, because there's been kind of back and forth, is that what exactly is owed to Black farmers? So there's been a lot of discussion on social media in terms of what is earmarked for Black farmers. Dan, could you speak to that?
Yeah, so I know we always talk about the tricky languaging of people of color and those sorts of things. But right. So I went and dug a little deeper into the bill, and what they did was they took Warnock and Cory Booker's Relief for Farmers of Color Act and kind of folded it into the stimulus bill. And what this bill does different, if you look at the Relief of Farmers Color Act, you will see that they specifically use the term Black farmers, which they never do when they do the people of color, moniker for other legislation. But in this one, they use specifically Black farmers, Latino farmers, Native, and Indigenous. Those are the people. And then they said this term means disadvantaged farmers. So it's not the catch-all that people of color has been in the other places. So this one, I feel like we will actually get some relief because of the way it was defined in the bill. The definition of the bill is very important. And this one was defined in the bill as Black farmers, Latino farmers, and Indigenous people, which usually it would just say people of color, and we end up being left out to dry.
And that is, in my conversation, that has always been, that has been my reservation, but that has been, I would say, the scripted reality over again is that they often use, in terms of like civil rights legislation, they will use the Black experience to pass the legislation. But when the legislation passed, like affirmative action, a lot of people benefit. And so my concern is that ensuring that Black farmers actually benefit, because it is their not only history of discrimination, but also their history of advocating for themselves. I think a lot of people don't know that Black farmers were actually in the forefront of civil rights voting, right? Wow. So this is why they said, this is some of the most important piece of legislation since the Civil Rights Voting Act. That is because Black farmers were in the forefront of Voting Rights Act in the South. We talked about this in the last one, Sherise, we were talking about that in Lowndes County in the Black Panther political party.
That was where I was going to go. You have softballed it. I mean, you have pitched it right to me so I can hit this one over the fence. That the Lowndes County, which is in Alabama, established the Black Panther Party, and the Black Panther Party emblem comes from Lowndes County, from those farmers organizing around the issue. That's when SNCC went down there. That's when SCLC, that's when other groups started gathering around, and the Black Panthers reached out to Lowndes County in Alabama and said, hey, can we use your Black Panther as our logo here in Oakland for the Black Panther Party, right? So that there's a strong connection here, but that's exactly why I think what Dame says is important, right? Is that that was a piece for Cory Booker and for Warnock that was not movable, right? That was something that was insurmountable for them in getting inside of the bill. That the reason that they allowed for the bill to fold up and to add other names was that those names had to be specifically named. And one of the reasons is and to Dame's point, if anybody understands about implementation, it's going to go then to an office for them to decide how to implement it. And so now the fight begins, and not necessarily the fight, because farmers union, farmers collectives are already lined up saying, this is what we want from the money that's available. But bigger than that, which not talked about the bill, it's not just that money is being provided, there is relinquishing of forfeitures. So if you lost your land within the last year, if the federal government came and took over your land lease in the last year, then you get your land back, right? That's another big piece that I don't think people are really discussing a lot, is about this land forfeiture and how people were literally pushed off the land during this Trump administration while they were in a lawsuit over that same land, right? And so the bigger piece to me, not only that is the idea that they get their land back, right? Because we know that less than 1%, right, 0.3% of farmers in the country are Black, right? And so this idea that they're being ran off of the land during a Trump administration, and that in the very next administration, that land can then be given back to you, rightfully given back to you, speaks volumes to not just the money, but the attitude about this administration and what the administration is here to do. The other biggest thing that I think is important that people I think have forgotten is the appointment of Susan Rice as what they call the race czar, right? And she has made it very clear about this money for these farmers, right? And that they're going to be looking at the Department of Agriculture when it comes to this. They're also going to be looking through HUD, right? That and people don't understand the connection oftentimes between the USDA, the Department of Agriculture, I should say, not the USDA, right, but the Department of Agriculture and HUD and housing, right? They have there's a link that's there. And so that was one of the things, by having Marcia Fudge be appointed in that position, is going to put pressure on the Secretary of Agriculture, on top of the fact that you have another Black woman and Susan Rice breathing down the neck of this problematic secretary inside of the Department of Agriculture. So I am very much hopeful, because we are at the table. We've always been advocating, and we know exactly what we want.
You wanted to say something, Dame? I'm sorry.
Yeah. I just wanted to piggyback on kind of what she was saying too, because you know how we always talk about the things we don't trust in this administration. And I know I always say it, but I'm not ever going to stop saying it. The things that I do trust in this administration are the Black women in the positions that they are in, and how most of them have been known to move. Those are the things that I pay attention to, and those are the things that I put forward when we have these conversations about, because I think the biggest issue with the last stimulus and there was no oversight for anything for anyone. Exactly. And that's how Black businesses were left out. That's how the Lakers got a small PPE loan, and the Chipotle, you know what I mean? And you got community centers in the hood that are like hoping they can get a loan, and a lot of them, some did, a lot didn't. But I think this time
Ark Republic has not gotten anything. Okay,
right.
Anyway.
Exactly. So they have now some kind of oversight, and a good thing is we finally have some Black women that are a part of that oversight. So I just wanted to.
And Dave, let's be very clear. We have Kamala Harris as the chief Black woman over this, right? Like we're talking about, there's Kamala Harris on the job, there's Susan Rice that's on the job, and now we have Marcia Fudge that's tangentially on the job because she's over HUD. So we're not talking about one Black woman, we're talking about a trio of Black women, right? Who, to your point, for however you see them in problematic other things that they've done, they have shown a history of trying to, in the most of who they are, support the people. And that was one of the biggest things about Marcia Fudge being appointed, right? That was the big pushback against her in the Senate was her full-throated support of Black interest.
And I also wanted to add, just to kind of like, for folks who are listening, so out of the $10.4 billion that has been budgeted towards agriculture, $5 billion of that is connected to farmers of color. The media, the mainstream media, has been, in my opinion, framing it as Black farmers, but that is actually, to me, misinformation. It actually is farmers of color. But Black farmers have been used as a template and perhaps the story in order to justify and validate the reasons why the USDA and the federal government needs to pay more attention to and provide more support to non-white farmers. So out of that 5 billion, 4 billion, as Sherise was talking about, is to outstanding debts. Then 1 billion is for tech assistance, outreach, training, education, and grants. So that is, you'll have nonprofits who work in these sectors begin to reach out to Black farmers or farmers of color in order to get the necessary training and whatever it is they need in order to either sustain their farms or buy their farms or make more money or make their farms more sustainable. And so this is totally a shameless plug. Black Farmers Index, which is something that was created out of a project for Arc Republic to date, is the largest free public listing of Black farmers. So if you want to know in your area a Black farmer that you can support, go to blackfarmersindex.com. But I wanted to also bring up some really important facts that have been coming out, because the GOP, who did not support it, have been calling this kind of like a welfare come up for
reparations.
Black.
They call it a reparation.
Reparations. Yeah, they've been using that, this term of reparations. But Mr. Boyd, who is a Virginia farmer, John Boyd, a Virginia farmer who's a head of Black Farmers Association, has been advocating for well over 3 decades, gave a really great scenario. He said one of the many things that Black farmers lack is loan assistance.
Right.
And he talked about how he lost his land some years ago, and a neighboring white farmer told him that when he was, here we go, $400,000 in debt, the USDA gave him some type of debt forgiveness so they could restructure the loan or write down the loan or do something so where he wouldn't lose his land. John Boyd was $40,000 in debt and he lost his land. So he's talking about, and he said, because he answered the question in terms of, I don't call this reparation. I just call this social justice, as just a move and righting some of the wrongs that have been done in agriculture, because I don't think a lot of people understand Black farmers have been dispossessed of their land since the early 1900s in terms of what is documented. It's gone on before that. I am the descendant on both sides of my family that were kicked off and removed their land simply because these Black farmers were excelling more than the whites in the area, which is a narrative.
Right, but we know that they were going to, this is the problem that I always have with they were doing better, so it was market competition. Well, they should have been doing better. They were the ones working the fields. What do you mean that a colleague of mine in Stillman said this, and I love him for it. His name is Russell Rivers. He said, you can't invent the lug nut wrench unless you're taking off lug nuts. Right? You can't come up with the cotton gin unless you pick cotton, right? So this idea that we shouldn't be doing better is ludicrous to me. And so the idea is we were doing better, and because the structure is laced with white supremacy and this mythology in white folks' minds that they should be superior based upon the fact that they live next to the Caucus Mountains, is what then makes them feel that they should be able to take control, which is why I always advocate for having a seat at the table. And if you don't have a seat, pull up a chair, because what we are not going to do is we're not going to split up my body figuratively and literally on this table, because my skill set is better and greater than yours because you have forced it to be in this situation. So when he calls it social justice, that's exactly what it is. This is social justice because Black people have been disenfranchised because of their skill set, because of economic envy that white folks have had, because of the ideas and the fact that we have worked the land. We are the creators. We have then been able to invent, in many ways, modern farming science that we can't even have access to. So this to me is the foundation of where Black people lost. We always talk about the Great Migration and Black folks leaving the South and going to the North. Why? Because of this right here, because of the distreatment of Black farmers. This had everything to do with why Blacks started going up north and out west.
And I want to add to, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was saying, I just wanted to add to kind of what both of you guys are saying too. The USDA is social justice because USDA has been so racist in their practices. We went from, and this is in recent years, this is even back to like when our grandparents were running farms, but in recent years, we went from 12% of farmers, which is not even a lot to start with, 12%, we are now only 3% in recent years. And that means they've been at a higher rate, taking our land and everybody at a higher rate. We haven't been getting the loans that our white counterparts have been getting. And then even on top of that, the new technology that comes out, they weren't making it available for our Black farmers. The new seeding processes, they weren't making available for our Black farmers. Like, it's so many things that go into it in a systemic version, in a systemic way, that they have to systemically reverse it, right? Mm-hmm. And this is just a very, very small piece, but I do agree with you, Kaya, that I feel like they were trying to push the Black farmers up front, because I think what they were doing was they were trying to make it look unconstitutional. I think that's what that play is. That play with Lindsey Graham and all them get on TV talking about the Black farmers are getting something specific for them. They try to make it look unconstitutional so they could try to reverse it and get out the bill and then take it to the Supreme Court as something unconstitutional. Now, this is something that I learned under Barack Obama. Certain things you have to say people of color, even if you include Black people in it, because constitutional lawyers will be able to take it to court out of constitutionality. But that's why I like how they slipped it in this bill, where they said Black farmers, and it was first, not only was it first, but it was every time they talked about disenfranchised farmers,
exactly,
Black farmers were on top. And they went to specifics about the things that happened to Black farmers in this bill, which also means that's now on record in regards to how the USDA have done Black farmers. So I think all of those things are important to the conversation as well, because these are things that I think finally the Democrats are getting a little bit smarter about how they're trying to move. Dave,
to your point about this argument about BIPOC, right? It's deeper than it's the constitutional basis that you're presenting, but it's deeper than that. They're laying a foundation for this for HR 1 that they're coming behind with, right? They're laying what they're doing is laying the foundation, and they're laying this foundation on top of the 14th Amendment. And so this language in this bill, this is why Cory Booker and Raphael Warnock need to be praised here, right? Because the language is extremely intentional as to set a judicial precedent. That's the goal right now. And while they're fighting against voter rights, while they're doing that, they're bringing it against the 14th Amendment. They're bringing it against the 14th Amendment, or they're bringing it against the First Amendment. They're not even dealing with the Civil Rights Act of 1965 that still has Section 1 and Section 2 that's viable. They're not even doing that. They're setting a new judicial precedent. And that is why I think what you're highlighting, and that's why I loved your post on Facebook, right? Because people have to understand the nuanced approach to what's happening, which is why Biden needs to, in this moment, because we already see, Mark Twain says that history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. And we can already see where this is going, right? We know that many of FDR's policies got struck down at the Supreme Court, and we know that the Supreme Court is stacked in a conservative manner. So that is why Democrats need to be serious about leveling out the court. That's the next step on this, right? That's the next place that they need to go.
I want to also add that I believe that Warnock was positioned in order to introduce the bill or another version of the Justice for Black Farmers Act, which is what Cory Booker did, right, into the Emergency Relief Aid for Farmers of Color Act, purposefully, because Georgia is such a central state in terms of maintaining the Senate majority vote, right, for Democrat. So that is totally intentional.
And Kaya, he has to run again in 2022. Yes. Remember?
Oh, really? Yeah, because it's a special election.
He was in a special,
yeah,
right?
That's right.
He went up in the special, so he has to go back up in 2022, right? He's very much aware of the fact that he has to go back up in 2022, and he needs to set a foundation for what he came there to do. Areas around Macon, Georgia are looking at what he's going to do. Places around Atlanta, DeKalb County, Cobb County, Henry, where there's a lot of farming happening, Clayton, where there's a lot of farming happening. Right. They're looking at what he's going to do.
And also another thing is that in terms of shoring up the rural vote, which is what you're talking about in terms of these counties, he also has to shore up the urban vote. And living in Atlanta, there's a lot of people from Jersey. right? So Cory Booker coming down from Jersey and advocating or being part of this bill is very strategic. So I appreciate the way the Democrats are moving in these strategies. I want to say a couple of like just pieces of information I think that's important for people to understand. At the peak of Black farmers owned 16 to 19 million acres of farms.
Mhm.
Wow.
We're not counting the sharecroppers. If we counted the sharecroppers, which are people who actually worked on other people's land that was owned, it would exceed
Right.
that number far more, right? So that was at the peak. Now today they say it's roughly 1 million acres.
1 million. Mhm.
1 million acres. That is how much the drop or the decrease has had as a result of systemic years of discrimination, being chased off the land, so on and so forth.
One more thing, Kaya, before
Yes.
you loop us back to the farmers, another political point that I want to make sure I make very clear here as well, because I love being on the record making these political points because people love to challenge me. And I'm like, yeah, but I said that 6 months ago. So go back and look at Arc Republic from 6 months ago where I said that.
Check documents.
Right. Check. I got receipts. Okay. So one of the things I really want to say here too is the importance of the Congressional Black Caucus. One of the biggest reasons,
You're right. No, you're right.
One of the biggest reasons Warnock can literally come in and revolutionize a bill is because he had 50 something members who have been working on this stuff for decades, who have put up bills, who have given floor speeches. So all he had to do was be smart enough as a younger, as a junior senator, come in, get it part of the caucus. And what did they do? Here's all the information. This is what we've done. The reason I want to show that is because that's the part of the legacy. So I'm not saying that they're perfect, but having that legacy, now they're the largest caucus inside of the Congress. They now sit on every single committee in the House. So now there's an opportunity to really wield power. And the reason I want to make this point is because that's exactly what they did. They sent two of their own. They sent Cory with his behind and Warnock with his behind, and they sent them both down there together, right? Showing again, like you said, a regional alliance from the north to the south, using resources from a caucus that Newt Gingrich tried to kill. And the reason that I think it's important by we raising up Newt Gingrich is because Newt Gingrich is from the state of Georgia. That is where he is from. And Lucy Bath, the mother of Jordan Davies, took over his seat in a swing district. So I want to show you that this success is not without years of preparation and without years of quote unquote compromises that people could be upset about. I just want to make sure that I make that.
I'm glad you made that, because I also want to say the whole practice of older congressional CBC members making the newer members as the front of the vote and they co-sponsor it is a very intentional and strategic alliance, because a lot of these older members or tenured members are sitting on committees, and so it's like, okay, you go ahead and do that. And then I will work the committee. So there is a strategy that is definitely going on, because I went ahead, I researched all these bills, and I'm looking at, okay, well, Ilhan Omar is on this bill, but Maxine Waters or Karen Bass, is co-sponsoring it. So I'm like, okay, I'm seeing what the strategy is. This actually segues into what it is I wanted to say. I just want to give a couple of figures, and I wanted to talk about kind of like the conversation or some of the bite back in terms of those who are eligible for the farmer to get aid, but their stories were not prominently told. So you remember when Trump had that beef, the trade wars with China?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
What came out is that 99% of the aid went to white farmers, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this is what this provision is coming on. Then secondly, during COVID-19, Black farmers there was this program called, I want to say it right, it's Farmers to Families Food Box Program, which is part of SNAP benefits. A lot of people know that agriculture is connected to SNAP, right?
Yes.
SNAP. So this program that we're providing what we would call basically community CSA boxes or produce boxes to poor families. Almost all of the Black farmers that initially were on the program, their contracts were not renewed under the Trump administration. And what happened is that because with COVID-19, the restaurants shut down, these farmers were not able to sell to the restaurants. So they began to be paid by the federal government in order for their food to go to needy, starving families. And so then the Trump administration cuts them off. So this is also, in my opinion, how this provision in the bill really gets a very strong support as well, even though it was very bipartisan.
But let's be very clear. The reason that they're in that position is because Trump, the trade war. So I want to contextualize this a little bit. One of the biggest reasons that Black farmers get cut out that bill, 99% of the aid goes to white farmers, is because it was specifically over soy. How many Black farmers are growing soybean? This was all intentional. Like, I want to say this because this is how they cloak and justify why they do what they do. Because I get into a trade war with China. China stops buying our soybean, right? We are the #1 soybean producer in the world. The number, and I'd be curious to see this, but I know it's almost negligible, the number of Black folks that are harvesting soybean. So then when I go to provide the aid, I write a provision. This is why Dame's point about how things are written is extremely important. Then I write a provision for aid, but I write it specifically for soybean, which then cuts out the fact that Black farmers can't, which legitimately, right, legally cuts them out from being able to get the funding. That's why language is important. That's why understanding how they go about this game is important. They're not going to call you nigger outright anymore. Most of them are not. They're not going to come up to your face and just burn your land and put a cross on it. No, they're going to burn you in this policy. They're going to write your name out of this policy. That's how they do it. And that's why I think it's important to highlight what you're talking about, this idea of the loss of contracts, the fact that I wrote legislation in such a way that you cannot get a part of, that you can't get any of the relief, right? That to me is extremely important that we highlight.
And I think it's also important that we also highlight that everybody that got subsidized under this China wars did not grow soybeans, but it is their connections and knowing folk that put it on the books that they did grow soybeans, right? So these are the things in terms of Black farmers of color are missing out. But I want to say this because this also popped up in Dame's conversation about Black farmers. There was somebody who advocated for Native and Latino farmers. I was talking about Black farmers and how this bill is, built on the experience of Black farmers. And the person jumped in and said, well, who is picking your tomatoes basically right now, right? And I think we need to be very careful about creating or buying into this divide that has been created specifically in the agricultural and labor markets in the United States. Dame, could you speak to that?
Yes, absolutely. And that's why I wanted to drop in on her and tell her, like, listen, I understand what you think you're saying, but you don't have all the information at this point. It's like, because what you were saying, Kaya, was, listen, so often this legislation is built on the backs of Black people, and then we don't get to see the benefit. Earlier, you brought up affirmative action. And a lot of people don't know this, but the biggest beneficiary of affirmative action were white women.
White women.
You know what I mean? And that's like the biggest example you can always use, because affirmative action was supposedly to help, Black people get a step ahead. But because everybody were able to fit under this catch-all umbrella, we were the least who benefited, and the most were, white women who were able to benefit. So I wanted to explain to the young lady who jumped on the post, like, listen, she has valid and legitimate concerns about why this bill is written this way. And the biggest thing is, if we're all right, y'all gonna be all right. That's the thing. That's the thing y'all don't get.
That's where I was going. See, I would have gotten into a discussion and I saw it and I left it where it was because I didn't want to get too doctory on her. But I left it where it was because I wanted to say, sweetheart, the problem that you're not understanding is that the Western world is built on pigmentocracy. And pigmentocracy is the idea that Black is the worst and white is the best. And so when we get to having these discussions, if I do better, right? If Black folks do better, because we the sticky at the bottom of the barrel, if we do better, that automatically means you do better. That automatically means that your comrades that are picking tomatoes and picking strawberries right now are going to do better. And the reason is because not just because of pigmentocracy, but because of the advocacy of Black folks. There is very few times in our history where we say, help us and forget everybody else.
Exactly.
Which is why many people get at us, get at our neck all the time about coalitions, because we never position ourselves to say, help us and forget everybody else who is disenfranchised. That's never our stance. Our stance always is, we want to make sure we get our fair share, but anybody that's being treated unfairly, we cannot advocate for ourselves without mentioning, championing anyone else who's been oppressed. So this idea that who's picking your tomatoes now, but who's been fighting from the very beginning before you got here to pick the tomatoes is really the question.
And I think, with everything it is you said, and also to me, the epitome of what happens when you have this very insular argument, right? Or you look at things in a very narrow way, is what happened to the chicken farms of the
Yes.
Latino folk who worked at the chicken farms in Mississippi.
Yes.
Before they worked on the chicken farms, there were Black people, but because basically these plantation owners brought cheaper labor that they could exploit, which were Latino immigrants who were undocumented, they were able to work these people in unsafe conditions, lower wages, and all the other type of exploitative things that happens. And at the same time, this is going on because Black people and poor whites, Black people and poor whites were advocating to be unionized. Right? So when you bring, this labor that is unprotected and you kick out the labor that can vouch for unionization, then you're vulnerable, right? So if you don't understand why it is important that Black farmers or Black people in agriculture are, this legislation passes through and understand this experience, then you really need to do some more research. And I need to also say this in terms of this. When you talked about we never leave out anybody, is the biggest hoax is this idea that you will, how do I want to say this? You as a non-white person in America will get more if you just advocate in your vacuum. That is the biggest myth to me in terms of advocating, in terms of solidarity and power and so on and so forth. I know you got something to say.
No, I don't want to belabor us this point. I just want to also remember, because again, right, I've written this book on the Congressional Black Caucus. I want to remind us, right, that this idea of chicken farmers in Mississippi is just a rerun of the catfish of the catfish plants, right? And Congressional Black Caucus were at each other's necks about what they were going to do about it. And some of them, got to calling each other Uncle Toms and the whole thing. And I remember in my research, there was a letter from a Mississippi representative. His name is escaping me now. He was seen to be center, almost center right. He was seen to be center, but many of the people in the Black Caucus thought him to be, right. And he wrote a letter to Ron Dunlap's like, listen, I know you may not agree with my methods. I know the caucus may not agree with the methods, but as the chairman of the caucus at this time, I need you to get the members off my back so that I can try to then work with the union and work with the company so we can get these folks back to work. Like we don't have to agree on everything, but I'm asking for some level of political cover because the white folks are dousing me down here while I'm trying to get Black people that have been disenfranchised at these catfish farms back to work, right? To your exact point that through the union, right? They use their power through the unions to then be able to garner that or broker that. And I remember that distinctly because it really helped me to understand that inside of this coalition as Black folks, we're not always going to agree, right? We're not going to always agree about the methods, but we should always be clear about the liberation of our people.
I hear you.
If you want to see good news, you don't see on regular TV from another perspective, something relative to your needs. And we gonna have deep subjects, and we gonna turn the lens. And there's no topic we won't skip, so please don't miss. We